Hey you guys, welcome back to the salon, and here we are with the second installment for what's going to be another long-running series. If you missed the first video, I gave a bit of background on the short-lived thriller TV series starring Boris Karloff, which aired in the 1960s, and I talked about the first 6 episodes, so I'll link the first one in the description if you want to go back and watch that one. I don't really want to rehash kind of like the background of the show again because I already did it on the last one. So this one, I think we're just going to dive right into the next set of episodes, the next half dozen episodes. That'll be episodes 7 through 12. So the first one we're going to be talking about is episode 7, which is called The Purple Room, and that was one that a lot of people had recommended and said, oh, this is right when Thriller started to get really, really good. As I explained in my first video about the earlier episodes of Thriller, that they were mostly crime and suspense stories, and that the more horror-based stories didn't actually come along until later on. Now, even though that same statement can mostly be made for the episodes I'll be covering on this video, 7 through 12, The Purple Room is the first one that's pretty overtly horror. And this was, easily my favorite among the 6 episodes that I watched in this little chunk here. Now, though it is ostensibly a ghost story, the resolution ends up not being supernatural, I think. I mean, I guess it's a possibility it could be supernatural. I'll get into that in a little bit. This actually has a lot of similarities with the original House on Haunted Hill from 1959 with Vincent Price, obviously. Regardless, it's still, I think this is actually really one of the best episodes, I think this is the best episode that I've seen so far. The atmosphere is really good, really creepy. It's kind of going back, like I said, in a more gothic, ghost story type of direction, and the acting is really good as well. So we actually opened, this was I kind of laughed out loud when I saw this, but we opened on a shot of the iconic Psycho house, which, on the Universal backlot, very, very famous. Now, the Psycho house has been cast in this particular story as a stately old mansion called Black Oak. I think it's called Black Oak is the name of the house. So at the beginning, there's a guy named Duncan Corey, who's actually played by Rip Torn. And he has inherited this house after the death of his brother. Now, all he sees pretty much are dollar signs. He has absolutely no interest in moving into this place but the house is located on this really valuable piece of property that's actually it's not super valuable right now, but it's going to be really valuable in a year or two because there's all of this land development going on. So he's like, woohoo, cha-ching, I'm going to cash in on that shit. Like many stories of this ilk, though, there's a catch. Duncan's brother has stipulated in his will that Duncan has to spend one night there, and if he does that, the brother believed, that will be sufficient to cement his love for the house, and afterwards he has to live in the house for 1 year. Now, if he lives in the house for 1 year and then he chooses to sell it, then he's absolutely free to do that. But the brother in his will says, I don't think that he's going to want to sell it after the year has passed because he's going to fall in love with it just like I did. Now, if Duncan does not abide by these rules, then ownership of the house actually defaults to his cousins, I think, relatives. It's a married couple. So it's a couple named Oliver, who's played by Richard Anderson of $6 Million Man and Bionic Woman fame, and his wife, Rachel. Now, Rachel is actually played by Patricia Barry, who I immediately, yelled because I noticed... I immediately recognized her as that busybody friend of John Forsythe in the 1964 movie Kitten with a Whip that also had Anne Margaret in it. I've seen it multiple times on Mystery Science Theater 3000. It always cracks me up how fucking nosy she is, coming over to John Forsythe's house. And she's like, hey, someone's on your other line of your phone. Hey, your newspapers are on your line. I'm like, God, mind your fucking business. And I still remember on the MST episode when she says something about one of his phone lines lighting up. I think Mike on MST 3K was like, who are you, Lovejoy? Leave me alone. You know what I mean? Because she's so fucking nosy. But I was like, oh my God, it's Lovejoy. But yeah, not actually Lovejoy. That's Ian McShane, but you know what I mean. So it's that lady. So she plays Rachel. I also discovered, too, that Douglas Hayes, I guess is how you pronounce his last name. It could be Hayes, could be Hayes, not really sure. He wrote and directed this episode of Thriller. He also directed Kitten with a Whip. So there you go. Maybe that's why he used that same actress again. It's a small world, isn't it? Incidentally, this is the same guy that also directed 9 Twilight Zone episodes, including one of the best Twilight Zone episodes, Eye of the Beholder. So there's that. Anyway, so Oliver and Rachel show Duncan the house, and they tell him all about this horrible tragedy that supposedly happened there. Couple lived in the house before, couple heard weird noises downstairs, man went down to check, left his terrified wife in the bedroom holding a loaded gun. Wife apparently sees something coming into the bedroom that looks like a creepy apparition. Wife shoots said apparition. Apparition turns out to be her husband, and then she subsequently went mad because she killed him. But then when he was found dead, he had a knife in his heart. I can't remember like how that exactly worked out, but yeah, I mean, it's just been a couple days since I watched it, but you know what I mean? So anyway, he had a knife in his heart because that's kind of important. So this man, Jeremy, is supposed to still haunt the place, and in particular, the titular purple room, where the cousins, Oliver and Rachel, have arranged for Duncan to sleep. Yeah, oh, this is the only room that has all of the stuff in. I mean, you can move if you want to, and if you're scared, well, they do that kind of stuff. So the couple leave. They leave Duncan alone in the house for the night. And pretty much immediately, spooky hijinks begin to ensue. You got your phantom footsteps, you got your unexplained cold breezes, you got creaky doors, the whole 9 yards. Now, Duncan is convinced that Oliver and Rachel are basically just fucking with him and keeps loudly, like, making jokes and berating them like, hey, I know this is you. Oh, where's the weird smell? Oh, there it is. You know, oh, you guys are doing such a good job, blah, blah, blah. They're doing that kind of stuff. But he's just like, look, dudes, I gotta go to sleep soon. Would you please just, like, knock off all this foolishness? But as the phenomena continue, it's clear that he's becoming less and less convinced that his cousins are actually responsible for all of this ghostly mischief that's going on, and he's kind of also getting like more and more scared of the heightening activity, like maybe this is really paranormal. Now, at long last, he goes downstairs and sees what is supposedly Jeremy's ghost, complete with a knife poking out of his chest, because like I said, that's important. And wearing from what I read online, he's wearing the mask that was apparently designed for the 1957 Lon Chaney biopic Man of a Thousand Faces, which had James Cagney in it. It's a cool mask, and it's obviously like a mask, but it's a cool looking one. So I have to say too that the reveal of the apparition is actually really well done, like this really blurry face like slowly coming into focus, like as the ghost gets closer and closer to Duncan. It's like really well done. It's really spooky. Now, Duncan, still believing that this is probably Oliver in a costume, is kind of shitting his pants anyway, and finally he can't really take it anymore, and he empties his pistol into the ghost, which just keeps on coming at him. So at this point, obviously, Duncan believes, oh my god, the ghost is real, and he has a heart attack and keels over dead. Now, moments later, it's revealed that, spoiler alert, the ghost actually was Oliver in a costume, and that he had preloaded that pistol with blanks. So he and Rachel, not surprisingly, wanted to get their little scheming paws on this house, so they decided to, make like a Scooby-Doo villain and frighten Duncan out of the place, which would void the will and pass ownership on to them. They hadn't actually meant for him to drop dead, though, so now they have to cover that whole thing up, which is really kind of like cramping their style. So after they try to make it look as though Duncan plowed his car into a swamp near the house, very psycho again, they decide to spend the night at Black Oak because they think it will look less suspicious. But Rachel is already getting really nervous, saying she always believed that this house was actually really haunted. Now, Oliver keeps telling her to quit being such a ninny or whatever, but as they bed down for the night, there's kind of like a replay of the story that they told about the original couple. They hear weird noises downstairs. Oliver goes down to check, leaving Rachel in bed, like terrified with a loaded gun. You know the drill. It's kind of like the same thing. Only this time, Rachel doesn't end up shooting her husband. She actually ends up shooting Duncan, who either wasn't really dead and staggered back to the house in a daze, like from the swamp where they dumped him, or he was really dead and was possessed by Jeremy's actual spirit. It's not real clear which, because she keeps, like, they don't show him coming into the room. They just show her, like, terrified face, like, looking. She goes, is that you? Is that you? I can't see you. I can't see you, even though it's, like, light in the room. So I'm not really sure if they were meaning to imply that she saw the ghost, or, like, you know, I don't know. But it's not real clear. Now, even though the plot of this one was pretty pat and pretty easy to figure out, like, you're pretty sure, like, almost from the get-go that, you know, Rachel and Oliver are fucking around. But it's still, like, a really fun, creepy episode, and it's easy to see why it's one of the ones that people remember, like, the most fondly. The cinematography is actually really effective. It's very eerie, and the acting is, like, pretty solid, pretty entertaining, and the whole thing has kind of, like, a real old-school spook show kind of flavor to it, kind of like a William Castle flick, like I said, like House on Haunted Hill or something along those lines. So episode 8 is called The Watcher. Now, this episode was pretty decent, too, and still kind of skirted around horror territory, as it actually centers on what would today, I guess, be termed a mission-oriented serial killer, although obviously back in 1960, they didn't call it that. So the actor Martin Gable plays a school teacher named Mr. Freitag, whatever it is. Freitag. That sounds like a game. So this guy, like, rents a room in this nowhere little podunk town. He's a big ass, like, Bible thumper, and pretty much, like, not only goes around endlessly quoting Milton at everybody, like, which is very eye-rolling, you know, he goes around, like, decrying how sinful everyone is these days. Oh, and also he's kind of like a peeper. Like, he goes around watching people's comings and goings from his window, grumbling about these kids today, these damn promiscuous teens, and all of the presumed sex that they're having with people other than him, I'm guessing. Thing is, though, that even though all of the real, like, copper-bottomed old biddies in this burg just love them some Mr. Freitag, him being a good, upstanding Christian citizen and all, we as the audience already know that this fucker is a stone cold serial killer, because the very first scene of this episode shows him, like, sadistically drowning a teenage girl. This bit, like, this sequence at the beginning, it seems like this might have been like a precursor to the opening sequence in Dementia 13, like the Francis Ford Coppola, his first film from 1963, because it's very similar. It gave me, like, that real similar kind of vibe. So he kills that girl, obviously. We see it. Now, the girl's death later, nobody else saw it, obviously. So it was deemed an accident. So nobody really suspects that this shitheel is doing anything nefarious. Another thing that he does that clues us in that he's a serial killer, obviously, is that he types up letters to send to the police, kind of taunting them. And the first one that he sends says, "Is there another corrupter abroad? I must be sure before I kill again." I'm like, well, okay, that's fair. So apparently, Mr. Freitag has honed in on this 20-year-old young man named Larry, who had been casually dating the girl that he killed earlier on. Now, Larry is played by a very young Richard Chamberlain, and he's shirtless a lot, so, you know, if that's your thing, you know, check it out. Larry is now seriously involved with another young woman named Beth, who's played by Olive Sturgis, and the two of them are thinking about getting married. But for whatever reason, Beth's mother doesn't like the two of them dating. I wasn't really clear about what the issue was, like, with the two of them. She wasn't, like, supposedly, like, too young. I mean, he was 20 and she looked like she was maybe 18, 19. It wasn't, like, anything weird. So there's that. But so Beth actually has to sneak out to see Larry, which is causing her a lot of anguish, like, with her family, because she has, like, this kind of drunken uncle who she's always kind of like, hey, can you tell mom that I'm over at my friend's house, but I'm really going to see my boyfriend, blah, blah, blah. It's that kind of stuff. But she doesn't like it because she doesn't like having to lie to her mom. Now, Mr. Freitag, even though he has fuck all to do with any of this, doesn't like the situation either, and basically, like, leers at these two people, like, constantly, even going so far as to follow them on some of their dates so he can, like, watch them from, like, behind the shrubbery or, like, up on top of a mountain or some shit like that. It's super, super creepy. Now, early on in the episode, Mr. Freitag approaches Larry while Larry's working. Like, he works, like, in a boat. He's, like, a shipyard or something like that. Like, he's fixing boats or whatever. And Mr. Freitag is, like, asking him all these really kind of invasive, nosy questions about, hey, what's your future, whether he's going to college, blah, blah, blah. And I kind of got the impression that he was, like, low-key coming on to him. And I was just kind of like, wait, did they just... I don't know. It just seems like he's standing very close to Richard Chamberlain and kind of touching his arm. And like some of the stuff that he said was like almost seemed like it was coded, like this creepy old dude was trying to come on to this young guy. It's like maybe I'm imagining that, but I don't think so. It definitely did come across like that. So Larry is very curt with him and then later tells Beth that he thinks Mr. Freitag is creepy, which he absolutely is. So Freitag eventually decides he's going to have to kill both Beth and Larry to punish them for their transgressions, whatever the fuck those might be. And he proceeds to try to do the thing. Now, what stood out to me in particular in this part of the episode was not only how fucking shifty, the serial killer is, obviously, but just how fucking awful both Beth's mother and Larry's aunt, I think he lives with his aunt, what fucking bitches these two women were. Check this out. They both separately called Beth a tramp, like on separate occasions. Like her mom, like straight up smacked her and like called her a tramp. I'm like, Mom, goddamn. And the thing is, like, she doesn't do anything trampy. Like, even if she did, that's still not okay. But she was totally not doing anything trampy. Like I said, it's not like she's 12 and she's dating a 20-year-old and they're freaking out. She looks like she's about the same age as him. They're dating like normal. They don't seem to be having sex. They're kind of like making out and stuff, but big deal. That's like, I don't know. I don't know why it's trampy. And they're talking about getting married, so I don't get it. And this is even worse. Like, so it's bad enough that they call her a tramp and, shit like that, which she's not even doing anything trampy. But then, like, after Larry gets wounded by the serial killer and Beth, like, is, distraught and, like, muscles her way in to see him, like, despite the aunt being like, you can't go in here, you trampy little whore, blah, blah, blah. But after she goes up to see Larry, the aunt straight up tells Mr. Freitag, who's also there because I think he lives in that house too, like, because he's renting out a room. She tells him, if it didn't go contrary to my Christian beliefs, I'd wish them both dead. Her nephew and her nephew's girlfriend. I'm like, great, that's awesome. And that's kind of ironic too, because as it happens, I was like, hey, you're in luck. Mr. Freitag is here to actually kill both of them, so you might just get your wish. You horrible twant. Yeah, I was just like, what the fuck is up with these ladies? So what I'm saying is the authority figures in this are the absolute fucking worst. And it feels as though that this was done really deliberately in order to kind of maybe demonstrate the hypocrisy of these so-called Christian people who would rather see their children hurt or killed rather than have to endure the shame of someone finding out that, oh my God, their teenagers might be having fun somewhere or having like premarital sex or something like that. It's like pretty blatant because as it turns out, like the teenagers are kind of the reasonable people in this whole story. They were the ones that saw Freitag as being like a creepy old fuck, while all the kind of traditional oldster boomer type people were kind of like snowed by his veneer of piety, I guess. Like they were, oh, he's such a nice man and he's a school teacher and he's a Christian and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, and he was a fucking serial killer. And the teenagers were like, they didn't know he was a teenager. They didn't know he was a serial killer, obviously, but they knew he was a fucking creep and they didn't want any part of it. Gotta say, though, that the ending of this is left a bit ambiguous. Freitag goes up there and tries to kill both of them. Beth smacks Freitag in the head with a vase or a chamber pot, or I don't know what the fuck it was. Some big ceramic thing. And he subsequently falls out a window. She didn't actually mean that to happen. He just kind of like stumbles out a window. But I was wondering, like, after that happened, if all the shitty parents and parental substitutes would even believe that Beth was just defending herself and would instead just kind of like tut-tut at her about what a floozy she was and how not surprising it is that she would stoop to killing poor old religious Mr. Freitag. And so I was just kind of like at the end of this, I'm like, is this a happy ending or not? I kind of feel like maybe it isn't. And I think maybe Beth realized that she's like, oh shit, I'm going to get blamed for this now, which is why like at the end, she just like looks down at Mr. Freitag laying there all sprawled in the garden and she's just like screaming and screaming and screaming. So like I said, I'm not really sure. I don't think it's a happy ending. That's all I'm saying. And I don't know if that was the intention, but that was the vibe that I got. So I don't know. So episode 9 is called Girl with a Secret. And this episode actually went back into the more crime blackmail-y kind of area. And as such, I think it was kind of one of the weaker installments of this whole bunch that I watched. So it stars Myrna Fahey as a woman named Alice, and she recently married this dude named Anthony, who's played by Rhodes Reason, and she's going to meet his wealthy, formidable family, as he calls them, for the very first time. So they get there, and sure enough, the family are a bunch of standoffish weirdos, and one of them is played by Cloris Leachman. But that isn't even the worst of it. Only hours after arriving at this big sprawling estate, Anthony gets called away on business. Now, he claims that he has to fly back to Minneapolis right away because his boss got injured and needs someone to fill in for him, and he's the only man to do it. So Alice isn't really too jazzed to be left alone with Anthony's rude-ass relatives, and she kind of considers just flying back home on her own. But the family eventually kind of persuades her to, hey, it's fine, just chill here for a while. What, don't you want to hang out with us? You too good for us? Like, yeah, they kind of pull that kind of crap. So yeah, she's like, no, it's fine, I'll stay here, Jesus Christ. And you can tell she's like, oh God, please kill me. So while Alice is helping Anthony pack, though, she notices that his plane tickets are actually for Mexico City, not Minneapolis. So she asks him, hey, honey, what in the blue fuck is going on with that? Now, he's reluctant to tell her anything at first, but he finally admits, hey, I've been a secret agent for the past 2 years, and I'm not really allowed to tell you anything. And he's like, basically, now that you know where I'm going, this whole mission that I'm supposed to be on is compromised, and I'm gonna have to call it off now. Alice promises him that she'll keep mum about it, though, because she kind of encourages him to carry on with it because, you know, the original plan, it kind of entails nuclear secrets and it's in the interest of national security and blah, blah, blah. So she's like, no, you should probably, you have to do it. It's like for the safety of the nation or whatever. I promise, I won't tell anybody. So he is like, okay, but if I do this, just like, seriously, if you breathe a word to anyone about where I went, it could get me killed, so please don't. And she promises she won't. So Alice makes good on her promise, but unfortunately, the family's cleaning woman, Mrs. Peel, who's actually played by Ellen Corby, aka Grandma Walton, she happened to overhear the whole Mexico City conversation, and she demands a really expensive pair of Alice's earrings in order to keep her mouth shut. Now, Alice doesn't really have much choice about this, and so caves in and gives them to her, but it turns out that these earrings, which Anthony had given her earlier, are family heirlooms, and the relatives aren't real enthused about seeing them dangling off the lobes of this lowly maid. So they basically start castigating Alice as though she's a kid, really. It's pretty horrifying, about, like, giving them to Mrs. Peel, like, why in the world would you do such a thing? So, of course, Alice can't tell them, like, why that whole thing happened. And even though they start to suspect that she's maybe being blackmailed about something and it maybe has something to do with Anthony, she absolutely refuses to tell them anything, knowing that one little slip up, anybody finding out anything could get her husband, like, essentially rubbed out. Now, this one was actually directed by Mitchell Leeson from a teleplay by Charles Beaumont and was actually an adaptation of a 1959 novel by Charlotte Armstrong, who also wrote the novel on which episode 4, The Mark of the Hand, was based. This one was all right, too, though nothing all that special. There's some good kind of, like, tension building around Alice getting into, like, deeper and deeper trouble and not being able to explain to anyone why she's stonewalling everybody. So that was good. And I have to say, I really did enjoy Mrs. Peel's character because she was such a grasping, like, greedy little shit, and she was, like, totally unrepentant about it, and it was, like, really, really fun, like, seeing nice old Grandma Walton playing a role like that. It just, like, I don't know, it just, like, tickled me. So episode 10, The Prediction. Now, this one is the first, I guess, legitimately supernatural episode of Thriller, and also the first to feature Boris Karloff in an acting role rather than just, like, the hosting role. So this one was actually directed by John Brom, who also directed, like, a lot of things, but also the 1944 Jack the Ripper movie, The Lodger, which is actually really good. So this one was actually, like, a lot of fun. Karloff actually plays this sort of avuncular sideshow psychic type dude called Mace the Mentalist. And he does not make any secret of the fact that his entire act is just, like, illusion and cold reading and stuff like that. He doesn't claim to have, like, real clairvoyant abilities, in other words. And seems like a genuinely good guy. He's just beloved by everybody. And he has, like, a real nice, like, grandfatherly relationship with his lovely young assistant, whose name is Noreen. She's played by Audrey Dalton. And her dad is, like, an abusive drunk. So I guess she's kind of like, you know, she has, like, a good father figure. So there's that. Now, for reasons left unexplained, Mace is suddenly blindsided one night by an apparently real psychic vision. He foresees that a boxer named Tommy Timms is going to die in the ring at this prize fight that's going on a few miles away from like the sideshow or whatever. Now, he's very alarmed by this, as you would be, and he persuades some of his friends, colleagues, whatever, to go to the arena to warn the boys' manager, like, what's going to happen, like, to stop the fight. Now, one of the guys he sends, Roscoe, says that he warned the guy, but the fight went ahead anyway, and the kid was indeed killed. But it then comes to light that Roscoe actually didn't warn anybody. He just placed a bet on the fight, suspecting that Tommy was maybe going to bite it. So Tommy's manager then accuses Roscoe and Mace of kind of like orchestrating the death in order to like cash in on it. But Mace is like really, really appalled at this whole idea because, like I said, he's a nice person. So meanwhile, Mace keeps having visions about one thing and another, and it's really starting to get to him. Now, Noreen has been seeing a guy named Grant kind of on the sly, and he wants to marry her, but she's reluctant to leave Mace in the lurch, especially now that he's having so much trouble with all of this shit that's going on. So Grant decides he's going to ask Mace if it's okay if he marries Noreen and takes her away to Edinburgh, where he has a job waiting. And he's actually surprised because Mace very warmly like concedes, like gives his blessing, but he's had a very terrible vision of death concerning the young couple. So he only allows it on the condition that he's like, when you're driving out of town, he tells Grant, if you see a twisted sign reading Edinburgh 50 miles, like on your way out, then promise me that you'll immediately turn back, because that means my vision is going to come true and you guys are going to die. So Grant, who at the last minute actually found out that the job wasn't in Edinburgh, but it got moved to Rome, is happy to agree to this. He's like, we won't even be driving anywhere near Edinburgh, so how could the vision come true? Everything will be fine. So the rest of the story like plays out pretty much how you'd expect, with a bunch of things kind of like conspiring to make things line up with Mace's vision. Though it does end with Mace essentially sacrificing himself, like to save Noreen and allow her to get on with her life. Because since he kind of knew like how shit was going to go, he's like, well, I have to go intervene, like, so my vision doesn't come true. Now, although there isn't any really solid explanation about why Mace suddenly started having real psychic abilities after years of just like apparently faking them for money, I didn't really mind that all that much. You know, it's supernatural, so whatever. It doesn't really need any explanation. And I mean, it's always great to see Boris Karloff in anything, and he's so great in this. He's just like so charming and so lovable and so kindly. And he actually gives like a really, really good, like heroic performance, and actually surprisingly a very physical performance for as old as he was when this was shot. I think he was in his early 70s. So yeah, he's actually like really, really great in this, and easily like the best part of it. So episode 11, The Fatal Impulse. And this is another kind of like nail-biting heist type of story, I guess. So this episode was actually directed by Gerald Mayer from a teleplay by Philip MacDonald, who actually co-wrote the 1945 movie The Body Snatcher with Val Lewton, which also had Boris Karloff in it, matter of fact, and had Bela Lugosi in it, now that I'm thinking about it. And this was actually based on a thriller novel by the very prolific author John D. MacDonald, who probably best known nowadays for writing a novel in 1957, which was called The Executioners, which is the basis of Cape Fear, both versions of the movie. So in this one, the ubiquitous character actor, I swear to God, this dude was in everything, Elisha Cook Jr., He plays this sort of like deranged nut named Harry Elser, who's planning to assassinate, for some reason, the candidate for mayor, whose name is Walker Wiley, with like a miniature bomb that looks like a little box, like wrapped in brown paper. Like it's about that big, like kind of like a cigarette case size, but like thicker. So he disguises himself as a maintenance man, and he's able to get into Wiley's office, but he gets spotted by his secretary before he can actually plant the bomb in the dude's desk. So he beats cheeks, still carrying the bomb, and apparently in a panic and wanting to rid himself of the evidence, because he's being chased at this point, he actually drops the bomb into somebody's handbag while they're in like this crowded elevator, then kind of like skedaddles out of the building. Unfortunately, moments after fleeing the premises, he gets hit by a truck. Now, before he dies, he tells the police that he put the bomb in someone's handbag. So from that point on, it's this kind of like race against time while the cops are trying to figure out whose purse the bomb is in before it detonates at 11 p.m. That's when the timer was set to go off. Fun fact, one of the potential receivers of the explosive who they go like question is played by none other than Mary Tyler Moore, who I recognized immediately. I recognized her like in the elevator shot. I was like, is that Mary Tyler Moore? And then I was like, are we even going to comment on that? And then like later on, there's like a little, she's only in like one scene because she's like a minor part, but they go and interview her like, hey, did you find a bomb in your purse? And she's like, no, I didn't find a bomb in my purse. It was kind of like that. But I was just like, hey, it's Mary Tyler Moore. That was pretty cool. So anyway, interwoven with all of this chicanery is the kind of dating misadventures of a woman named Jane Kimball, who not only turns out to be the person that was the unwitting recipient of the bomb in the handbag, but worse, is stuck in a relationship with her insufferable boyfriend, Robert, who is played by famed MST3K punchline Lance Fuller, who played Brack in This Island Earth and mumbled his way through the entertainingly terrible 1956 sci-fi film The She Creature. I must admit, though, I kind of loved the ending of this episode because after being saved from the explosion by the valiant Lieutenant Rome, who's played by Robert Lansing, Jane pretty much tells Lance Fuller to like fucking beat it because she likes the cop better, the sexy cop who saved her from getting blown to smithereens. And she's basically like, bye, Lance. And she's like, I'm here with this hunk of man right here who saved me from the bomb. I just thought that was like super, super funny. But this was another, like I said, completely decent episode. And the countdown to the bomb going off was a really effective narrative device. Like I said, it was like really good for suspense and whatnot. And it was always kind of funny, like how much of a dork like Lance Fuller was. I don't know. I was very amused by that, I guess. So episode 12, The Big Blackout. This one was actually another crime-oriented story, but I found myself getting really into the whole mystery of this one because it kind of played out, this is going to sound weird to say, but it kind of played out like something like a much more serious noir version of that movie, The Hangover. You know what I mean? So there's a guy named Bert Lewis, who's played by Jack Carson, and he's a recovering alcoholic. Now, he apparently spent 2 years in a bit of a drunken haze with hardly any memory of what may have transpired over that time period. So he went to jail, I think, and eventually to rehab, and has managed to kind of put his life back together. He's now got a very loving wife named Midge, who's played by Nan Leslie. They also have a baby named Bibsy. I think the baby's name is Bibsy. I think that's what they said. I'm like, what the fuck kind of name is that for a baby? I don't know. And he has a gig running a charter boat, like for fishing charters and stuff like that. The job doesn't pay all that much, but he seems to be getting by. Now, at the beginning of the story, his friend and business partner, Ethel, who's played by Gene Cooper, calls him up and asks him to come and see about a guy who's like passed out drunk in the motel that she manages. It turns out that after getting out of rehab, Bert became like an AA sponsor. So he's always kind of keen to help somebody else who's struggling with the demon drink as he struggled with it. So he's kind of like well known in those circles. So the guy in the motel is in pretty rough shape. And he's going to be transferred to the clinic where Bert kind of convalesced there. But while Bert is looking through this dude's stuff, like looking for his ID, he finds a note that basically implied that he, Bert Lewis, that he might not be who he thinks he is, like that might not be his actual name, that he actually might be a dude named Bill Logan, and that he probably did something really bad over those 2 drunken years that he can't remember, because this guy here in the motel was evidently sent here to kill him. So Bert is kind of starting to wig out about this whole situation because it is entirely possible, he concedes, that he maybe did some really fucked up shit like during the big blackout of those 2 years, and he'll be damned if he can recall a single iota of that shit, even though really his own skin is on the line. Not only that, but the guy in the motel, whose name turns out to be Adams, later turns up dead, and it seems like someone is trying to frame Bert for the crime. Also, other kind of gangster type guys that he sort of knows, like from back in the day, they also turn up and threaten him and his family for information about Bill Logan. So Bert starts to suspect that he actually might be Bill Logan, but kind of the whole fun of the plot of this one is trying to figure out what the hell it was that Bert was doing for those lost 2 years that suddenly has all of these shifty characters like all gunning for him all of a sudden. I mean, it was obvious pretty early on, at least to me, that the exceptionally thirsty Ethel was involved somehow, but I didn't know exactly how, but I knew she was probably in on it in some way. But I still enjoyed this one regardless. It did take a couple of turns I didn't expect, and I have to say it was kind of nice seeing alcoholism treated with such relative sensitivity in a program that's more than 60 years old. Like, I don't know. I kind of feel like this was still the era of the funny drunk, you know what I mean? Where alcoholism was just like, oh, this crazy drunk person, you know what I mean? They do kind of play it for laughs a little bit, but I don't know. They take it like pretty seriously, and they talk about he was sick and all this other kind of stuff. And I was like, wow, that seems like kind of ahead of its time. So there's that too. Okay, so 12 episodes down, 55 more to go. That just like makes me tired just like thinking about it. I mean, these are fun to do, but it is kind of like time consuming because like I said, I'm watching 6 episodes at once, and each of them are like about an hour. So, and then I have to like, you know, write about all of them and stuff like that. So it does take a while to do. And that's why I'm only trying to do like one a month or something like that, because it's kind of like a big endeavor, but I am having a good time watching these. And from everything that I've heard, they kind of like got better and better as they went along. So I'm kind of like looking forward to some of the more horror ones like later on down the line. So hopefully you guys are enjoying this little series, and I'll do another installment, like another 6 episodes whenever I get around to watching them, probably next month sometime. So that'll do it for this installment. Thanks for dropping by the salon, and remember to like, share, and subscribe if you haven't already, and remember to go over to scaresalon.com where there's a whole bunch of written content, book reviews, movie reviews, and all sorts of other stuff that you can read and enjoy. And I will see you guys again on the next one. Bye.